Welcome to today's edition of Mental Health Matters. Today, we're going to be talking about the benefits of therapy in the workplace. I have Dennis Santiago on the show, and we're going to discuss how therapy improves the quality of life and the quality of work in the workplace. Get you something to drink, get you a snack, and come on back. Good morning, Dennis. How are you doing?
Good morning. How are you this fine day?
I'm all right. I stayed up kind of late last night. I ended up going and watching there was a UFC fight on yesterday, so I ended up going to watch that. I'm a huge sports fan, and but other than that, I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay. What have you been up to since the last time we talked?
Oh my gosh. Uh all kinds of stuff. So since the last time we talked, um I have been to Phoenix
Okay.
where I met with I think 18 financial lending institutions in a training session on
Wow.
loan underwriting for social impact lenders.
Okay.
And
Wow.
yeah, and then I did an economic development fireside chat um targeting the Filipino American community.
Nice.
Uh, um um and tried to get a bunch of banks interested in this very topic that we're talking about today.
Okay.
And yeah, so maybe made a little bit of traction in that direction. But
Okay.
yeah, so
Okay.
it's been busy. I actually drove from Los Angeles to Phoenix because I just wanted to have a car of my own when I got there, a bit more flexible.
How far of a drive was that?
Time wise, it's about 5.5 hours from LA to Phoenix,
Oh, okay.
which
That's not too bad.
maybe
That's not too bad at
about a
all.
half hour longer than it would take you to fly, but you got more flexibility when you get there.
Yeah, yeah. All right, before we dive in, let's just kind of talk about you introducing yourself, and then we'll just jump into it.
Okay. So, the context of our conversation today is that I put together this nonprofit organization called Humanizing Global Policy last year, and its its focus is on trying to find ways to take national and international policy issues and bring them down to the point that they're really touching real people. And um and it could be anything, right? I mean, global stuff. But when you get to the true human things, particularly things happening in the United States, you very quickly get down to, like, how do you make ordinary people's lives better?
Right.
Which is not a topic that's really well entertained or worked on from the point of view of programs that listen to the needs of people. And
Yeah,
I saw a need there, so I figured, like, if I know how to put together nonprofits, I might as well put together one that starts to address that need.
that's awesome. That's awesome. So, talk a little bit about you trying to get some funding for business owners that that could assist their clients to improve in the mental health space.
Well, funnily enough, so the angle that I'm trying to work on that is you got to find it funders who have something to lose if um, small business owners fail. Now, the statistics on small business is about 42% of them don't make it past 5 years
Yeah.
for various reasons. Either they got their business model wrong, which is what I was in Phoenix trying to work in a workshop with last week in terms of helping lenders figure out how to coach businesses into making their businesses more viable from the outset. Um, and or the stresses become too high because there's to run a small business, you basically are doing everything that a corporation has to do on your kitchen table,
Yeah.
and it causes stresses. um you get behind on things. You're not able to work on what you're really trying, what your business is really trying to sell or market to the public. And it will create stresses on you. It'll create
Yeah.
stresses on your family, and it'll create stresses on the worries that the people that have loaned you money
Yeah.
to put your business together, they're going to start to look at you going like, are you going to make it? Are you going to make it? Are you going to make it? And in many cases, that is for early stage businesses, it's not really banks. For early stage businesses, it's these community development financial institutions
Yeah.
and local community development corporations that take a chance on you, that might not get their loans might fail, right? And so and those kinds of institutions typically don't have a lot of money.
Yeah.
um, so what I'm trying to do is figure out a way to get larger financial institutions to support the concept of creating a way to detect when businesses might be starting to get into a lot of stress,
Yeah.
figure
Yeah.
out how to put workshops together for them, and then also figure out how to get one-on-one mental health services for either the owner or for the family, depending
Hmm.
on what's really needed. And typically they won't have a lot of money, they don't have a lot of free cash for that. So also I'm trying to figure out, where do you get fee relief where you can pay the therapist the
Yes.
the difference between what meager amount their insurance would cover, which could be all the way down to nothing,
Yeah.
uh to make it so that the you don't put a stress on the therapist that's trying to help you, because they're a small business too, right? So you
Yeah.
just don't want you don't want to pass the worry from one entity to another. So yeah, and that's kind of what we're trying to look into.
Yes. Oh, that's awesome. Really, really good work. One of the things I noticed being in a workplace, just working, throughout my years, if the head is not in a good place mentally, meaning the executive director, CEO, president, normally that energy trickle down into the business, so to speak, on the employees. And people could feel it, people can sense it. But if the head, meaning the executive director, CEO, president, is in a good place mentally, that positive energy also trickle down into the workplace on the employees. Um, I have worked at organizations where on both sides, where the CEO or the person in charge or whoever know that they need to seek therapy or some type of mental health counseling because the way the business is being ran, the employee morale. I mean, all of those things were key factors in the failure or success of this particular organization I'm talking about. And it just unfortunately wasn't a good space.
Yeah,
So
well, yeah. It's and it could be anything, right? You
yeah,
you could think your company is doing great and growing, and then a competitor will go like, "Hey, we don't want them competing with us," and then they target your company to defend their company, and then you have to deal with that on top of what you were it's very stressful, and then
yeah,
the owner the CEO, you know, if it's a corporation, or the owner, if it's a owner-owned business, is suddenly worrying about more than just operating the business, more than just getting the books right. Now they're worried about somebody coming after their entire idea,
Yeah.
and you know, and their people are getting worried, and so, you know, and that's another form of extended family. It's not just the immediate family of the business owner, you know, like I I learned one thing a long time ago, the first time I became a CEO. So you you spend all this time climbing the ladder to get to the top of the mountain,
Hmm.
right? And then you get to the top of the mountain, and then you sit down the first day on the job with this new highfalutin title, and you realize that it's a dirty trick. The
Mm.
dirty trick is the mountain inverts and it becomes a funnel, and every last problem in the entire ecosystem comes down that funnel and lands on your desk.
Hmm.
And that's your life from that point on. You worry about everything. Your biggest worry is the janitor with the 3 kids, and making sure their job carries on so that, you know, their kids don't starve, or their kids have the supplies that they need for school. You start to worry about stuff like that if you're a good CEO. I
Hmm.
mean, you know, not all of them do, but the good ones do. All the good ones I've ever met do, and that takes a toll on your mental strain as you sit there at night, because, you know, you kind of like, you dream about the worries. Anybody that's ever been in that position knows it. And if you're worrying about it all alone, it can be very, very stressful.
I do agree with that. I definitely agree with that. I know I've also worked at places where the same thing will happen. The people in charge will, naturally be concerned about some employees' financial situation, because they're only able to pay them so much. There may not be enough in the budget. Contracts may not allow, for raises and things like that. And they have to try to create other ways to, support this person financially. And, I know at a previous job, I know we had different programs where an employee can probably go and pick up extra shift like on the weekends or doing overnight and things like that to try to compensate for some of the monies that they feel that they need. But it is important, and I do believe that is stressful. um what what are some benefits for an employee, as staff members? What are some benefits for them with seeking therapy or mental health support?
Well, so years ago, in what I call the good old days of
Uh-huh.
Silicon Valley, I remember companies that were so into the mental comfort of their employees. Um,
Wow.
they actually, there was one company I remember. I visited them, and so there was this woman that walked around with a massage cart, you know, one of the things where you rest your head, and she would walk
Yeah.
around the building giving people neck massages all day long,
Wow.
just because they were working so hard, right?
Yeah.
And then she would look for people who looked like they were feeling a little bit stressed, and then give them a massage and a whole. This was a financial company, right? So they had money, and it was
Yeah.
the 1990s and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
and I thought that was, when I saw it, I go, well, that's kind of interesting, right? But the company was a
Yeah.
high performing institution, right? So it was demanding a lot of stuff out of its people in terms of productivity, but it knew that if it burned those people out,
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
over, right? And so they developed a technique for that. And I've never forgotten that little lesson in terms of how do you how do you get more out of your people when you're asking a lot of them. It's like there's like little things that you can do. Um,
Yeah.
Money is actually one of the most difficult things in terms, because if people have monetary problems, they'll like your employees are, they may have to hold second jobs, right?
Yeah.
Because you can't, you just can't pay them enough. You're particularly with government contracts and stuff, you're like, there are caps and limits and that are part of the contracts that go along with them, and you have ratios you can't um get around,
Yeah.
and normal salary ranges that may not be enough for people, but that's what the government expects you to pay.
Yeah.
And Particularly in high cost neighborhoods, like in like the urban areas of California, where the cost of living is way, way, way above what the average cost of living is for the entire state. Um,
Yeah.
Finding ways to make it so people that work inside the organization um, don't get themselves too stressed out is very, very important. You may have to find ways to, like, give them soft benefits, for instance, like, like
Yes.
if you need time off to go do stuff, you can have more time off. You could explore things like 4-day work weeks instead of 5-day work weeks, so that people have at least one day a week to go tend to their families and that type of thing, and make it work for them in ways that are easier on their minds, easier on their families. Now, that's, I mean, but if you own the place, you're not going to really be
Yeah.
able to explore that if you are not in a mental state that can consider those kinds of options as a way to make the place work better. If you're like totally stressed out, if you're a
Yeah.
very small company, it's like a pressure cooker, right? Because everything's happening in your own living room.
Yeah. Yeah. I worked for an organization a while back, and they were really, 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 really focused on the employees' mental health, financial health. I mean, literally, when I tell 100%, 100%. And it was the point where, I mean, the employees, meaning all of us under like the CEO and the COO and, things like that, they will send out surveys, to, um, they wanted our input on even like changing the name of the organization, or how does this environment help you, to provide quality of work. They will send it surveys about how to improve the employee morale. They was giving yearly I mean, it was just everything. And it got to a point where they incorporated every quarter a mental health day. That was one of the things that they did. So we just got a day off just for mental health day because the work was stressful. Then they went down to working 4 work days instead of 5, 4 10s. And you were able, they allowed you to choose what day that you want to have off during the week, just in case you have a doctor's appointment, a therapy appointment. I mean, they was really invested in the employees. And I thought that was very interesting because that was the first time I ever worked at a company that really invest in employees like that, because the job was extremely stressful. But you did see the benefits of that because people started to perform, on a higher level. They was more motivated to come to work because they felt like they was getting something out of it, and the company was invested in them, not just their work life, but it also transfer into their personal life as well.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. It's so one of the things I'm finding when you look at an issue like this, sticking with the employee experience and the mental health of the employee experience, is that the smaller the business, the less likely the owner actually understands that these kinds of tools are available to
Hmm.
them to make life better for their workforce. The
Hmm.
smaller it gets, the more it's the I gotta really work my tail off, and everybody really has to work our tail off. And if we all have to work 12 hours a day to make this work, you know, uh, and which is fine on a push.
Yeah.
Where it starts to break down stress wise is if you try to do that for like an entire year,
Yeah.
because nobody can sustain that level of energy for that long. So part of what I'm trying to do with the initiative that I'm trying to push out of this foundation is, how do you help make business owners more aware that there are other ways to get things done, because in a panic they'll do what they know, and what they know might not be the best thing for their business. And the other thing is, because a lot of these businesses are dependent on loans that they're getting from people, is how do you get their lenders to become more sensitive to the conditions where stresses might be building up, and get the lenders to basically take an interest in the mental well-being of, uh to use the technical term, their obligors, their
Yeah.
borrowers,
Yeah.
so that the loans don't go sour,
Yeah.
right? Because then you lose everything. The business goes down, the loan goes down, you got to hit your loan loss reserve, all that kind of stuff, which is, you become part of that 42% casualty rate of businesses, and you don't want that to happen, because that's bad for economic development as a whole, particularly in a society where I think it's what, like 52% of
Yeah.
all businesses in America are small businesses, right? So our economy is highly dependent on these people that are, other than, hey, very, very nice, you've got a business license, are kind of left to like figure it out for yourself, right? So there's very little help. Um, I personally think that the financial community, because they have things like, servicing systems on loans that can keep track of our loans being paid, or the payments being paid on time, or the credit quality of the business, what's that looking like? Are things slowing
Yeah.
down? Indicators that something might be beginning to go wrong, which is going to cause stress, and being able to offer the business on, hey, you might need a little help here, um, getting your head together, um, which is, in the end, it's the lender basically going, I really don't want your loan to go sour, because I really don't want to hit my loan loss reserve fund, right? That's the harsh reality of how that economic equation works. But in the end,
Yeah.
yeah, so being able to, and typically that's not, they wait until it's too late
Yeah.
before beginning to help people out, at which point the usual things of, like, picking up the guarantee and starting to foreclose on things, or hit the promissory note of the UCC one. I'm getting into technical terms. It's basically it basically translating the bad stuff starts to happen, which just makes things worse for somebody that was probably really, really trying, and just kind of lost it in their heads because just got too stressful for them.
Yeah. In your experience with doing these workshops or trainings, just overall, and just, with dealing with different corporations or lenders and so forth, how open are they, or how receptive are they to getting on board with what you're trying to teach them and get them to understand when it comes to, and small businesses and the mental health and things like that?
Um, when you talk about it in a social context, they all get it.
Okay.
When you ask them what are they doing about it, not a lot. Then that's the problem. People know the problem exists.
Okay.
People know that it's there. You say, "What are you doing about it?" And they go like, "Oh, yeah, right." Because they don't have any templates or programs or guidebooks on how to handle those kinds of situations. And because basically most of this stuff is taken from the formula plot. Small business development centers focus primarily on access to capital, licensing, accounting, administration, all that kind of stuff. Very little on in terms of looking out for the mental well-being of the business owner. That's not what an SBDC does. Um,
Yeah.
uh, and they don't have the kind of specialist staff. They don't have mental health personnel um,
Yeah.
uh, sitting alongside them, making sure things are well. And at the banks or CDFIs or credit unions and stuff like that, they don't have the staff to pay attention to that kind of stuff. They're
Yeah.
far more concerned about whether or not they're going to get their money and be able to
Right.
meet what's called a net interest margin on their business operations, which is what they're graded on purely on the numbers. And
Yeah.
with America is not a place that pays a lot of attention to the human heart when it
Right.
comes to business, right? Um, so that's a hole in the system, and a big gaping hole in terms of uh, how you support economic development in this country. And yeah, recapping the answer, people realize there's a problem, but there's not a lot of structure to address the problem at this point in time. Is it, from everything that I've seen.
Yeah, that's interesting. Um, and I honestly I see both sides. I get it where you're trying to meet a quota, you gotta, make this much or and I get it, but I also see the other side too, because these people who's performing at a high level, they're under a lot of stress, under a lot of stress. I know when the election, when Trump won the election, I know some of the things that he kind of was going to put in place and things like that um, started to affect people in the workplace. And one of the things was, about the federal fundings and things like that. And I know somebody who actually was affected by that. Personally, I know somebody was affected by that, and they had to halt his put his program on hold that he was spearheading and things like that. And I remember talking to him, and he was just so this he was so stressed out. And then I did suggest him. I said, well, have you thought about going and just kind of seeking a therapist, just getting some mental counseling and things like that. And at first he was very reluctant to that because he was just so focused on like how's he gonna survive. He got all these bills to pay. So finally he did, and he got the help that he needed to cope with his situation. But that is some of the things that people are starting to deal with in the workplace. And regardless if it's coming from an outside source or within an organization, it's still going to affect these people's mental health. And like,
Mhm.
what do we do as employers to address that with the limited resources we may have? you know
Yeah. Well, so there's a bunch of stuff that
yeah.
there's the causes of stress in 2025 are, if you're a nonprofit organization, for instance, yeah, I mean, your main cause of stress is what's going to happen to your program,
Yeah.
right? All right. If you're a private business in 2025, your main cause of stress is what are the effects of inflation and what are the effects of global U.S. economic policy. going to have
Yeah.
on your business, because as America makes changes in the way we interact with the world, it changes the fundamental rules and math of making a survivable business. Your supply chains change, your costs change, um, who your competitors get remixed, because the government could create incentives that makes it so that a large corporation has an incentive to take over an entire industrial sector. And if you happen to be one of the smaller businesses in that industrial sector, you know what? That sector isn't really growing. It's just
Yeah.
who owns that sector is
Hmm.
changing, right?
Yeah.
And so where do you fit into that pile? And are you mentally able as a business owner to go, okay, so at this point, if that's the way things are going, what's my best course of action, and how do I become comfortable with that? If I know my industry is going to get consolidated, how do I do that to the best that I can for myself and my employees to make
Yeah.
sure that we get the most out of that process as possible? Or if it's of the industry is breaking up, right? Because that
Yeah.
creates a different set of stresses. Basically, the economy is always making stresses for people.
Yeah.
And a lot of people want that kind of like simple, nice little nest egg that's working for them, and you're laying eggs and everything is going along real well. But, to take that analogy one step further, eggs,
Yeah.
just eggs, right?
Yeah.
Bird flu and what it's done to the chicken industry
Yeah.
in this country. You try to buy eggs these days, so even stuff as simple as stuff that you think is going to be there, that could all like evaporate on you overnight, and that's stressful, right?
Yeah.
And um so one, like, where are the workshops that teach people that these kinds of stresses are real, but they're not
Yeah.
the end of the world? One, where is the one-on-one that people need in order to say, I'm having a really hard time with this.
Mhm.
How do I deal with thinking about it, absorbing it, being productive in it, right? And then the third is, how do you set up peer groups of people who are having similar problems that you can lean on to,
Yes.
so that you can, so that you go like, I'm not alone. Yeah, our entire industry is getting sucked into something else, and so let's all of us figure out how to make the most of that. Or our entire industry is changing what our supply chain looks like, so let's figure out how to make the most of that. Or the cost
Hmm.
structure is changing. um but if you try to figure this out by yourself, I mean, think about it. If you have to figure out everything for yourself, it'll drive you nuts, right? But if you
Right.
had to figure out things so that you had some coaching on how to stay calm, and you had a peer group that's also working through very similar problems, you can see it's a lot easier to survive mentally and business wise in an environment where you have that kind of support structure than it would be, if you had dug a foxhole and you're just kind of sitting there waiting for the artillery to stop.
Yeah, absolutely. I know I worked for an organization, and they still offer this at Cal Voices. They offer a class, well, a group. I'm not gonna say a class, a group, where two people facilitate this 8-week workshop, and they give you tools on how to stay well, and you create a circle of support, and what can you do daily to stay well, and it really supports your mental health, and you really don't have to have a mental health challenge in order to go to this class, but just teach you how to overall to live mentally healthy, and give you tools to put in your toolbox, which you can pull out as needed. So workshops like that is definitely needed in the workplace, and it's free. I think it's still free. I know when I was there, it was free, where anybody in the community can join this workshop, and get these tools and this education training where when they
Hmm.
go back out into the workplace or into the community, they can have some tools to help them to cope with stress that is being caused in everyday life. um
Yeah.
some people unfortunately don't know how to go about finding that support or the assistance. And then some people are opposed to it because of the stigma,
Yes.
you know.
Hmm.
So
I was just gonna mention this, the self-imposed stigma.
yes, so
Yeah,
talk a little bit
you've seen
about
that
that.
too. Hmm.
Talk a little bit about that, or what or have you ever experienced that with folks or known folks too?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay.
America is it's kind of an interesting culture, right? We all of us,
Yeah.
regardless of who you are, you know,
Yeah.
we're very proud of, we can stand on our own 2 feet,
Oh
you
yeah.
know, and so if you look at the social evolution of America, it's the uh, self, self-sustaining cowboy image from the
Yeah.
past, right? Because you're on your own and you got to make everything work, and that has turned into other kinds of social values. You have women, the women's movement, which is basically at this point goes like a woman should be able to stand on her own, and that's kind of the expectation that
Yeah.
you're able to be economically self-sufficient just like anybody else. Very high expectations are
Yeah.
being set for people in terms of what people are expected to be able to do for themselves, and
Yes.
in some cases unreasonably high expectations, that you got to go it alone,
Yeah.
without a support group, because it's like you get a piece of straw, you put it in your mouth, you chew on it, you talk with like 10 words every 3 days, kind of, and you wear a Stetson thing.
Yeah.
Right? It's ingrained into our culture that,
Yeah.
and that if you ask for help, there must be something wrong with you,
Yes.
right? And
Uh-huh.
that's the big stigma,
Mhm.
is and I'm not a believer in that stigma. I mean, I'm one of those people. I mean, like I know I'm pretty smart. I can figure out a lot of things out. But the best times I ever have in front of a crowd when I'm talking to them is like, okay, so like I have absolutely no idea what's going on here, and I'm here to learn from you, right? Because
Yeah.
like um uh because I don't care how much I've learned right this minute for this subject to get information that can be used to solve the problem. I am going to be the dumbest guy in the room,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I'm going to learn to listen, right?
Right.
And which is a skill,
Yeah.
and it's a skill of allowing yourself to be vulnerable. And in this world, I mean, particularly when you take the internet where everybody's trying to make it so that life is portraying life as perfect,
Yeah.
when it's not. So you got
Right.
people leading Jekyll and Hyde lives, right?
Right.
Like everything is really, really great. And then, they turn your Facebook off. And the next thing, it's like, oh my God, I'm so worried about everything.
Yes. Yes.
And
Yeah.
that gap is getting bigger and bigger and bigger for individuals in this country. And it's not a healthy gap.
Yeah.
And there is, and like you said, there's a stigma against doing something about managing that gap. And
Yeah.
I think it's wrong that that it's, like, I would love an America where everybody goes like, my gap management strategy is,
Yeah.
and everybody knows what they're talking about, and everybody gets how valuable that is to leading a better life.
Yeah.
Just me.
Yeah. Dennis, for people who do not know how to go about looking for mental health support in terms of finding a therapist, um, outside of the workplace or even inside the workplace, what are some steps that they can take? Like I'm talking about somebody who may not have no knowledge about how to even go about looking for therapists, for look for therapists or therapy. What are some of the ways that they can get themselves started with getting that type of support?
Okay. So I this is like my mini workshop in 60 seconds with you. Okay.
Okay.
Like, so if you're feeling stressed, the first thing you ought to do these days, because you can do it, is go to your favorite computer, open up your favorite little AI thingy, and say, I'm feeling stressed like this. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Right? Just open-ended question, right? AI is not very smart in terms of diagnosing things, but it's pretty good at being able to look things up for general questions and giving you a general answer. One. All right. So you go from being a very low information, almost opaque, invisible, I have no understanding of what's going on. And in one question, taking advantage of the internet in a constructive fashion rather than the
Yeah.
destructive fashion of social media, you get a little bit more understanding of how is this affecting you, right?
Yeah.
And in those answers are usually embedded, like this is what your second question is, what do people normally do when they feel this kind of stress?
Mhm.
And you can ask any AI machine that question, right? And so I'm advocating taking advantage of tools out there
Right.
that can reduce your search to figure out one what you might be going on with you, so you have a better understanding of stuff. Once you get that, then you can ask the question, is this something where I need to get a support group, or is it something where I should go see a therapist? Right? Because of the nature of the questions that I just asked. And it'll give you some sort of an answer. That usually is kind of like a nebulous answer that may or may not be all that good, because you're now starting to ask AI to have an opinion. AI
Yeah.
doesn't have opinions. It just guesses what the next word is. All right. But uh but then you can go like, what resource, if I wanted to get resources,
Mhm.
what would peer group resources look like near me, right? What would therapy resources look like near me? How can I look up that stuff? And then the next question is, I have this kind of insurance. Does my insurance cover these
Mhm.
things? Because that's always good if you get some of it going. At which
Mhm.
point in the space, I'd say, of about 10 minutes, you can become a heck of a lot more knowledgeable about what your condition is, how common it is. And that's another good question. How common is this kind of stress, and what kind of people get it?
Mhm.
Right?
Mhm.
Those are the kinds of questions that, you got a computer, right?
Yeah.
Ask those. And if you don't have a computer, find somebody that does, that and you can sit there and look at the questions with them, or even your phone can do that, right?
Yeah.
But that's how you learn very, very quickly. And literally, I think it takes about 10 minutes to get yourself from knowing absolutely nothing to having a fairly clear idea about a pathway that you can explore and look at, to go, well, if I did this, maybe, it'll help me handle my stress better. And so that's my quickie clinic for you.
Okay. Very, very good. Very good. Um, should a person go and seek mental health support because somebody else want them to, or because they feel the need that they need this type of support? Because sometimes people do go, to seek help because, a loved one may feel like, well, you've been stressed out lately. You need to go and get support and blah, blah, blah. But the person may not feel ready, or they may not be ready. And sometimes they
Yeah.
just go to go. but their heart and their desire is not in the right place to get the help and support they need. And then they continue
Yeah.
on whatever path they're on. So is it important that they feel the need to go, the person who's seeking the help, or should they go because other people feel they should go?
Um, I think I've never found that other people telling you to go see somebody,
Yeah,
you know, other people telling you you need to see somebody or you need to do something is at the most what it's a cause for is for you to value yourself,
yeah,
look in the mirror and go, these people are telling me this. What do I see I need?
yeah,
And yeah, because like if you go and look for help for yourself, you got to be committed to doing the work
yes,
to help yourself, right? Because
yeah,
like people can go tell you you should do stuff, but they're not in your head.
right.
They're not the ones that where you as a business owner, for instance, are waking up every night feeling like you've got a hole in your stomach and your intestines are hanging in your hands as you try to figure out how to keep every your dreams alive. People can see it around you and they can feel it, but all they're really asking you to do is go work on yourself, and you have to be the one that's ready to do it, right?
Yeah,
Because if you do workshops and you're going to absorb something from a workshop correctly, if you're going to do one-on-one therapy and you're going to observe one-on-one therapy is like 95% of the work is you,
hmm,
and 5% is your therapist helping guide you down the bowling alley, warning you that your ball is kind of like coming close to the edge, and maybe they'll put the bumpers up to keep you from crashing. But you're doing, you're going to be doing 95, almost all the work, if not all the work, to
hmm,
figure this out, because what you're really trying to do is you're trying to train your mind, right? It's a form of, what do they call it, neuro linguistic programming, right?
hmm,
How the NLP guys, like, in order to become what you want to do, you have to convince yourself that that's what you want to be able to do. And which basically means, um, get the negative waves out. Did I just do a line from Kelly's Heroes? Yes, I did. But I know. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
like it.
But social metaphors are good, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. 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 Channeling Donald Sutherland. What the heck? Why not? But but you have to be ready to do the work yourself. So I don't think people telling you to do something does any more than tell you to look in the mirror.
yeah,
After you look in the mirror, you got to be on, or as you look in the mirror, you got to be honest with yourself and go like, are these people telling me the truth, the naked truth, and it's
yeah,
just me and myself in this bathroom, right? And if you go like, yeah, they're telling me the truth, then you go like, I got to make the commitment to go do this. And when you leave that space all by yourself, you go like, I want to do this. If you don't have that attitude that this change is important, I need to do this because everybody that depends on me
yeah,
is affected by my choice right this minute, then it's probably not going to work, right? Because the worst kind of therapy is one where, you're just going blah, 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 and then, but not making any changes. Therapy's not
yeah,
supposed to do that. Therapy's supposed to be something where you're doing really hard work to figure out
yeah,
what changes you got to make in your head to make life be better.
yeah. Dennis, I'm so glad you spoke on that, because that was going one of the questions that I had, was to kind of talk about what happens in the process of therapy. Because for those folks who has never been introduced to therapy, or have not had a generation of family members that were comfortable with seeking mental health support, like myself, they may not know. And I know, growing up, as an African American male, we were taught that, you just deal with your problems, you be strong, you
Hmm.
don't cry, you're overcomers, and all of this false sense of strength. Um, it kind of pulls you away from seeking, the support and help you need, in my opinion. And sometimes people they have a lack of understanding what therapy is about, and they finally get the first session, and they get started, and they think that the therapist is going to make everything okay, not realize that they have to put in this work. So I'm glad you kind of talked about that, because when you do start having these different sessions, you will be the one to put in the work if you got a good therapist.
Hmm.
And sometimes that work may be a little bit unconventional. It may not even be something that you think. Because I know what stood out to me in our last conversation when we was on the show, you kind of talked about, when you and your wife went, and the therapist was suggesting that you guys, have an argument because you guys wasn't really putting everything out there.
Hmm. Yeah,
And
yeah.
when I thought about that, a lot of people would look at that differently, but I understood why he or she went that route with, you and your wife in that session. But talk a little bit more about that, because it's important that people know that you're not just going to get in there and just see this therapist for 5 weeks, whatever, and everything's going to be all right if you're not willing to put in the work.
Yeah, no, no, no. Yeah, yeah, yeah. They're not going to solve your problem for you,
Right.
right? I mean, that's the bottom line.
Right.
Um, and it could take. Well, I think I told you last time. I from that advice to go have an argument, I had to wait like 10 years to actually
Yeah.
have that argument, right?
Yeah.
So it's patience and love and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
you're the one that's going to change yourself. The other
Yeah.
thing I think we need to add to this conversation is that it might not be the right therapist you run into the first time or the second time or the
Yeah.
third time, because you got to
Yeah.
find a match, right? And don't be afraid to go like, hey, this isn't the right person for me when you interact with them, because they might be wrong. I think in my life I've been to one, two, three, maybe four. Two of them I was made to go to by my company because it was part of what they call like executive charm school.
Yeah.
And those therapists were absolutely useless. Absolutely useless. I stopped seeing them as soon as I would go and go like, do I still have to keep seeing this person because
Yeah.
they're doing me absolutely no good? And they go
Yeah.
like, okay, fine. If you're gonna complain about it, then you don't have to see that person anymore.
Yeah.
Because they were some therapists are absolute nutballs and are actually worse for your mental health
Yeah.
than that. So you gotta you have to basically, when you look at yourself in the mirror and go like, this is what I really want to change about myself, then you got to find somebody that you go like, this person can actually help me.
Yeah.
And not everybody can, because it
Yeah.
may not be something that they know how to do. They, like they're human beings too, right? So
Right.
they're coming to that conversation with their own hangups and stuff, and they while they're trained to not bring as much of that into their discussion, they still can't change the fact that and it's even worse if you go see a life coach, right? Because
Yeah.
they tend to not follow any of the rules of stuff. So you got to be extra careful to go like, because you're doing 95% of the work, and if you go like, I'm doing 95% of the work, and you're learning, and you're going to learn to use things like the internet to look up more stuff. You're going to
Yeah.
start to build a peer group to go like, hey, does this work for you, and all that kind of stuff. And then you go like, what do you think? Like, if your therapist tells you this, what do you make of that? And they go like, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard, right?
Yeah.
And so that guy's crazy, or that woman's
Yeah.
crazy. Why are you listening to somebody like that? And like, well, who do you think I should go listen to, and what do I need to? This is a skill. It's a life skill,
Yeah.
right? And so and don't be afraid to exercise your good judgment
Yeah.
as part of accessing a tool
Yeah.
in order to fix something that you saw in yourself. It's when you have that look in the mirror moment, what you're really asking yourself is how do I get myself ready to be better for the dreams for myself, for my family, for the people I work with, right? And
Yeah.
that's the core of it, and a good therapist will pick up on that, and they'll go like, oh, what you really need to do is you really need to get rid of like half of your childhood training that trained you essentially how to not be able to do what you're trying to do,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah.
it's like there's a lot of negative things that happen as part of your childhood development, but it doesn't mean that it's not valuable because that's your culture and your history, but it's important to understand when it fits or does not fit the job that you're trying to do. It's like
Yeah.
you go back to your family and you be who you are, right? You go to
Yeah.
work and you got to be what the work needs and what your people need. I'm going to shut
Mhm.
up for a little bit because I, as you can tell, I can go on forever with this.
Well, thank you, Dennis. I love hearing you obviously share, which is why I'm glad that we can have these conversations because you have a wealth of knowledge to share. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. The hour goes by really quickly.
What's a
And
big subject?
it is, and that's why I like talking to you because you have so much to share. And we will connect again to do another show. I don't know, I just enjoyed talking to you because like I said, you have a lot to share and you do these workshops and trainings and things like that. So I think for people who watch, this show, they would get a lot out of it, you know. But man, thank you so much once again for taking the time out. And I'm going to connect with you again soon so we can schedule some of the books.
Oh yeah, you asked me the next set of questions. I'm like, okay, what happens when your therapist is crazy? How do you?
Because I had that on here too about not having the right therapist. So that's why I said I want to continue this discussion because that's something that people need to know,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah,
So,
no, definitely more to talk about that. I look forward to. I really like these conversations, by the way, and I thank you for very 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 much for the that you see that I'm actually worth the time having a chat with.
oh, for sure, for sure. And yeah, and I would connect with you soon, and we would definitely put something else on the books. For sure. And that's it for this edition of Mental Health Matters. If you enjoyed this particular show, if you would like a DVD copy of this show, or if you would like to be a guest on our show, please dial 916 366 4600. Thank you.